Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona, MSNBC political analyst and chief White House correspondent at the New York Times, Peter Baker, and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He previously served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army Europe. Monica, the president was really hyping up this press conference last night. Bring us the top takeaways and what it might mean for today's Senate briefing.
And I think the fact that this press briefing took place is significant in and of itself because they don't often hold those briefings with any kind of regularity over at the Pentagon. So the fact that the president was pushing his top officials here to come forth and try to continue to argue this narrative that they clearly want front and center to combat the early intelligence assessment that came from the Pentagon's own intelligence agency is clearly a communication strategy as much as it is one where they are trying to project this era of transparency, even if they didn't answer a lot of the crucial and key questions. But this is about the Trump administration trying to come together and put all of the information that they feel backs up the president's own really definitive claims in one place. And they're doing that by citing Iranian officials. They're citing Israeli Atomic Energy Commission assessments. They're citing other information as we wait to get the complete picture from the U.S. intelligence community, which we should note will take a lot of time. That's not something likely that would be available when we're here less than a week out from those bombings of the Iranian nuclear sites. But specifically, the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seemed to be performing here for an audience of one, as you had mentioned earlier in your show, this idea that for Donald Trump, it's very important to come out before cameras and present a clear defense of his decision making. And if he's been doing that since leaving NATO, all on social media repeatedly over and over again, he wanted to be sure that his officials could come and provide more information too. But General Dan Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he provided a lot more actual tactical, specific information that we learned a little bit more on the strikes. And I think that was part of the administration's effort too. But as you mentioned, that classified briefing behind closed doors, there could be a different tone too about some of this information that came out early.
And so that leads me to Melanie. How are lawmakers approaching today's briefing as they've been trying to get answers for days now?
Yeah, there's been a lot of frustration on Capitol Hill, particularly among Democrats, about the level of communication between the Trump administration and members of Congress. I mean, remember, at this point, most members of Congress still have not received a classified briefing on the situation on Iran since those strikes on Saturday, and that includes top members of Congress in the Democratic Party. Now, some Republican leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson said they have been receiving classified briefing, but as a whole, Congress is largely being left out of the loop. So there are a ton of questions that members have, and top of mind being just how successful was that strike. Here's Democratic Senator Warner.
I mean, there was lots of debate in the public domain before this action was taken about whether the bunker busters could actually destroy all of these facilities. Again, I'm hopeful that they're as close to obliterated as possible. But if they're not, then what next? I mean, does that mean future military action?
And so we'll see just how satisfied lawmakers are walking out of this briefing. It is going to be classified. It is going to be Senate-wide, and the House will receive their classified briefing tomorrow. But like I said, just a lot of questions top of mind and a lot of frustration going both ways between the administration and Congress over all of this right now.
General, what questions would you have for the Defense Secretary?
Well, number one, I would ask what's the strategic objective that this operation is supposed to move towards? This was never clear from the beginning of what happens next. Even if the strikes were 100% successful, then what? So, the problem when you focus so much on an operation without putting it in a proper strategic context, it really these are the kind of questions I think that members of the House and Senate want to answer. The second thing I would ask is why didn't the Secretary and the President listen to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs when he counseled patience? It takes a long time to get accurate BDA, battle damage assessment. But the pressure from the civilian leadership to hurry up and get something out there is why we are in this mess right now. I have to say, I don't know General Kane, but I'm more impressed with him each time he has to step out there because he seems to be a voice of calm professional reason. And then the third thing, look, I know that there's a lot of pressure involved in this. It's hard to answer questions from the press all the time. But for the Secretary of Defense, a government official, to lash out at members of the media by name in some cases because they don't like the coverage, I think not only is it it's a terrible example for the Secretary to set for all the hundreds of thousands of his subordinates, but also, in the oath to support and defend the Constitution, there is this thing about freedom of the press. And so in my mind, he's stepping over his oath to support and defend the Constitution as well.
Peter, the White House has, from day one, before any intel assessment happened, has been saying that Iran's nuclear facilities were obliterated. Is this an administration that will accept any intel that suggests otherwise? Can the American people have confidence on the info this White House is sharing?
Well, the signal the president has sent is that he wants the intelligence to fit his preconceived outcomes, what he wants the outcome to be. Now, it may be that he did achieve the outcome that he is describing. We don't know. These intelligence reports are preliminary. They are still gathering information. More information will be, assessed by professionals who know what they're talking about. But no question that the pressure and the signal from the White House is that the intelligence ought to suit what the president wants it to say. That's not the first time that's happened in our history, but it's obviously problematic in a lot of ways. Policymakers need accurate, dispassionate, detached intelligence to make reasoned choices, not intelligence that suits what they already want to believe. Now, instead of course, quarreling with the intelligence, in some ways, the president prefers to quarrel with reporters. It's an easy thing to do. Shoot the messenger is a longstanding tradition in our capital, in a lot of capitals. These are reporters, though, who have accurately reported what the Defense Intelligence Agency preliminary intelligence showed. That intelligence may not be complete. That intelligence may be supplanted by other intelligence, but it's obviously not the reporter's fault for reporting accurately on what they have learned. That's something of great public interest. Now, the president wants this to be true. It wants it to be true that these facilities were obliterated because he wants to basically declare an end to the operation, right? If there's intelligence suggesting that it didn't quite get everything, then he might come under pressure to have another operation, which I think he doesn't really want to do.
General, this morning, Defense Secretary Hegseth was asked about Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. Watch this.
Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo Mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect. We're looking at all aspects of intelligence. I'm not aware of any intelligence that I've reviewed that says things were not where they were supposed to be, moved or otherwise.
Then you have the president asserting on social media that this uranium stockpile wasn't moved ahead of the strikes, and saying that with some sense of certainty. Although, General, we do know that the International Atomic Energy Agency had been notified by Iran as far back as June 13th that they were going to take specific measures to protect those stockpiles and to protect their nuclear capabilities. So how concerning is this, the discussion and the way that the administration currently is framing it?
Well, the worst thing here is that people are going to lose confidence in our great intelligence professionals because they'll begin to perceive that the intelligence that does get out, exactly as Peter was describing, is something that was contorted to meet the narrative needs of the White House, or it was leaked because somebody disagreed with what was out there. And this is not only bad for our decision makers and our leadership, but also our allies. We depend so much on other nations, their intelligence agencies working closely with ours. And this intelligence sharing is a two-way street, and this damages our intelligence capabilities when people begin to lose confidence in our intelligence process. For me, this is the biggest danger here. I would be stunned if the Iranians had not moved or had not tried to move some of the materials out of there, because there's been so much talk in the last weeks about a possible strike, and certainly the Israelis had telegraphed this. So, I mean, nobody should be surprised if the Iranians actually were able to move some materials out of there. That's why the patience, let the processes, and we've got the best in the world, let the processes work so that we know.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention that the International Atomic Energy Agency said just this morning that there are other nuclear facilities in Iran that were not hit. So they would maintain the capabilities at those places as well, you would think. So, Peter, I also wanted to ask you about what we're hearing from Speaker Johnson, who's arguing that the War Powers Act, which limits presidential power to wage war, is unconstitutional. Those words from the Speaker. Do checks and balances still exist in Washington?
Well, this is a bipartisan issue, actually going back over multiple presidents. Multiple presidents of both parties have basically quarreled with the War Powers Act or failed to abide by it because they said it didn't apply in this circumstance or that circumstance. Basically, since the end of World War II, Congress has abrogated its responsibility as the body assigned by the Constitution to declare war. And the executive, in this case, President Trump, but other presidents as well, have taken it upon themselves to say, look, in my job as commander-in-chief, I have the responsibility and the right under the Constitution to use military force in limited ways, short of a full-on war. The question is whether this operation would qualify as that. Is the Iranian nuclear program posing a direct national security threat to the United States? Does this qualify as a war if it's a one-off military operation that destroys these facilities, given that there are no ground troops and no continuing operations? These are questions that have been raised on Capitol Hill. They're being raised by Democrats, but in the past they've been raised by Republicans. And I think that this is a sign of how our war policy, our war power policy, in effect, has evolved over the years, giving great latitude to presidents to use force without Congress participating.